Most people think the observer effect means your consciousness creates reality. It sounds empowering. It also happens to be wrong. In physics, reality doesn't change because you believe in it harder. It changes because measurement forces systems to behave differently. And here's the part most explanations miss. Once you understand what observation actually means in science, you'll see why changing your job, your relationship, or your environment often doesn't lead to real change, and why certain patterns in your life keep repeating no matter how much effort you apply. By the end of this video, you'll understand the observer effect clearly and accurately, without mysticism or hype. And you'll see how this same principle quietly shapes your daily experience, where things get stuck, and where real flexibility actually comes from. Let's start at the foundation. Have you ever noticed how the world can feel completely different depending on how closely you're paying attention? On some days, everything feels tight, urgent, loaded. On other days, with nothing objectively changed, the same world feels more open, more negotiable, less threatening. Same job, same people, same circumstances. Yet reality feels different. For centuries, science ran on a simple, comforting assumption that there is an objective reality out there, a universe that ticks along completely independent of us. A rock is a rock whether we see it or not. A system behaves the same way whether it's being watched or ignored. This was the world of Isaac Newton. Neat, predictable, solid. The first crack in that idea appeared more than 200 years ago, when scientists began experimenting with light. In 1801, Thomas Young showed that light didn't behave like tiny particles at all. It behaved like a wave. For a long time, that seemed to settle the matter. But then our tools improved. And when scientists started repeating that same experiment, they developed a way to fire single electrons, one by one, at the slits. This is where reality began to unravel. An electron is a particle, a single speck. Common sense says each one should go through either the left slit or the right slit, just like a marble. Firing them one at a time should slowly build up two simple bands. But that's not what happened. Even when they send the electrons one at a time with long pauses in between, the impossible occurs. Stripe by stripe, the classic wave pattern emerges on the screen. Let that sink in. A single electron, a lone particle, left the emitter, traveled to the wall, and somehow passed through both slits at the same time to interfere with itself. It's like throwing a single marble at two doors and having it go through both at once, then collide with itself on the other side. The physicists who saw this were baffled. Their reaction was basically, okay, let's find out which slit each electron is really going through. So they placed a tiny detector next to the slits, a sensor that would do nothing more than register, yep, an electron just went through here. It wouldn't block the particle, just observe its path. And the moment they did that, the realization hit. Everything changed. The interference pattern disappeared. The electrons, as if suddenly camera shy, stopped their wave-like dance. Each electron was now recorded passing through only one slit, either left or right, never both. And on the back screen, the pattern that formed was exactly what you'd expect from particles. Two simple, distinct bands. The very act of measuring, of looking, forced the electron to behave. This is the observer effect, not as metaphor, but as mechanism. Not because a human mind is watching, but because measurement requires interaction, and interaction forces a system to settle into a definite outcome. Physicists call this process decoherence. In simple terms, the more precisely a system is measured, the less room it has to behave flexibly. Reality doesn't stop existing when you stop looking, but it does become more rigid when you demand clear answers from it. That's the key. And once you see this at the foundation of physics, something subtle clicks. Because life doesn't feel rigid all the time, it becomes rigid when we approach it that way. Human lives are systems too, complex, adaptive, sensitive to pressure. You may not be collapsing wave functions when you open your inbox or walk into a meeting, but you are constantly interacting with reality through attention, expectation, and emotional response. And just like in physics, the way you engage determines how much flexibility remains. Over time, what you measure most consistently, what you check, anticipate, brace for, becomes what feels most real. That's where the observer effect quietly leaves the lab. Not as mysticism, as a practical way of understanding why certain patterns keep solidifying in our lives. The quantum observer effect is a fundamental rule of the universe, but there's another totally different kind of observer effect that has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the messy, biased, and fascinating human mind. This is the observer effect in psychology, and while it doesn't change the laws of nature, it absolutely changes the behavior of people. Unlike its quantum cousin, this version isn't about physical interactions. It's about cognitive biases. It's the well-documented fact that people, both the researchers in a study and the people being studied, act differently simply because they know they're being watched. The most famous example is the Hawthorne effect. The name comes from studies in the 1920s and 30s at the Hawthorne Works, an electric company in Illinois. Researchers wanted to see if changing the lighting would affect worker productivity. They cranked up the lights, and productivity went up. Then they dimmed the lights, and productivity went up again. They even pretended to change the lighting, and productivity still went up. The conclusion was stunning. It wasn't the light. It was the attention. Knowing they were part of an experiment made the workers feel special and motivated them to work harder. They weren't trying to fool anyone. Their behavior changed unconsciously just because someone was paying attention. While modern analyses show the original results were complex and maybe not just about attention, the core idea holds. You've definitely felt this. Think about how you drive when you spot a police car in your rearview mirror. You sit up straighter, grip the wheel at 10 and 2, and your speed becomes perfect. Your behavior changes under observation. Or imagine trying to work with your boss standing over your shoulder. The pressure to look busy and competent is real. That's the Hawthorne effect in action. An even sneakier form of this is the observer expectancy effect. This is when a researcher's own beliefs about an outcome unconsciously influence the participants or the data. The researcher isn't cheating. Their bias just leaks out in subtle ways. For instance, imagine a study for a new painkiller. A researcher who believes the drug works might interact differently with the group getting the real medicine versus the placebo group. To the real drug group, they might ask, "So, how much better are you feeling?" framing an expectation of success. To the placebo group, they might ask, "Still feeling any pain?" framing an expectation of failure. Their tone, body language, and encouragement can all nudge participants toward the expected result, skewing the data. The ultimate story of this is clever Hans. Hans was a horse in early 1900s Germany who seemed to be a math genius. His owner, Wilhelm von Osten, would ask Hans a question like, "What's 3 plus 4?" And the horse would tap his hoof 7 times. Hans was a sensation, correct about 89% of the time, but a psychologist named Oskar Funkst investigated. He discovered Hans wasn't doing math. He was an expert at reading human body language. When the questioner asked a question, they would unconsciously lean forward in anticipation. As Hans tapped his hoof and got closer to the right answer, the person's tension would build. At the correct number, they'd make a tiny, almost invisible movement, a slight relaxation, a raised eyebrow. Hans learned that this was the cue to stop tapping. When Funkst had people ask questions who didn't know the answer themselves, Hans's accuracy plummeted. The horse was clever, but he was a master observer of people, not a mathematician. This ties into another mental trap, the actor-observer bias. This is our tendency to blame our own actions on external situations, but blame other people's actions on their character. If you fail an exam, it's because the questions were unfair. If your classmate fails, it's because they're lazy. If you cut someone off in traffic, it's because you're in a hurry. If they cut you off, they're a terrible driver. We're the complex heroes of our own stories, while others are often just simple characters. Our perspective as either the actor or the observer completely changes how we interpret the exact same event. These human biases are a huge threat to good science. To fight this, the gold standard in research is the double-blind study. In these trials, neither the participants nor the researchers know who is getting the real treatment and who is getting a placebo. By making the observers blind, science protects itself from the flaws of the human mind and gets closer to objective truth. So we have two worlds shaped by watching. In the quantum world, it's a physical disturbance that collapses possibilities into one reality. In the human world, it's a psychological pressure, a filter of expectation and bias that colors our behavior and our reality. We've now walked through two very different realms, each with its own version of the observer effect. And it's important not to confuse them. They share a name, but they are not the same thing. The quantum observer effect is a physical process, period. At that scale, you cannot measure anything without physically interacting with it. To see an electron, you have to disturb it by bouncing a photon off it, altering its electromagnetic environment, or extracting information about its path. That interaction changes the system itself. This isn't a limitation of our tools, it's a fundamental feature of reality. Measurement and disturbance are inseparable. The psychological observer effect, on the other hand, lives entirely in the human mind. It has nothing to do with collapsing wave functions. It's about how attention, expectation, and social pressure subtly influence behavior, often without anyone realizing it. And unlike the quantum case, this kind of observer effect can be reduced or controlled for. That's why science uses double-blind studies, placebo controls, and rigorous protocols to prevent the observer's beliefs from shaping the outcome. Two very different mechanisms, two very different domains. And yet, despite that difference, they point toward the same deeper insight. Observation is never truly passive. Whether you're a physicist using a particle detector or a human being watching another human being, the act of observing changes the system in some way. In physics, it does so through interaction. In psychology, it does so through interpretation, expectation, and response. So what's the real takeaway here? In physics, this discovery completely overturned our old picture of reality. The universe, at its foundation, isn't a machine made of tiny solid parts behaving independently. It's a probabilistic system, a landscape of possibilities that becomes more definite when information is extracted. Observation doesn't merely reveal reality, it participates in how outcomes take shape. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's the reason quantum technologies exist at all, from semiconductors to lasers to quantum computing, which attempts to work with probability rather than against it. But the implications don't stop in the lab. In our daily lives, understanding observer bias may be just as important, if not more so. Because while you are not physically disturbing reality the way a detector disturbs an electron, you are constantly shaping your experience of the world through how you pay attention, what you expect, and how quickly you interpret what you see. Every moment, your mind is filtering reality. You don't experience the world directly. You experience your interpretation of it. That interpretation is shaped by past experience, emotional state, identity, and social conditioning. And once an interpretation becomes familiar, It begins to feel like just the way things are. This is why observer bias is such a powerful lesson in humility. It reminds us that we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Our expectations quietly steer our perception. Our assumptions highlight certain details while hiding others. We don't merely respond to reality, we respond to the version of reality our minds construct. That's why scientific rigor matters. It's an attempt to look past our own reflections, to separate what's actually happening from what we're projecting onto it. And this insight applies far beyond science. The next time you're in an argument, notice how quickly the actor-observer bias shows up. You explain your own behavior in terms of circumstances, stress, pressure, context, while judging the other person's behavior as a flaw in their character. Same situation, different observation. The next time you hear a shocking headline or a bold claim, ask yourself not just what is being said, but how it was observed. Was bias accounted for? Were alternative explanations considered? Or are you being invited to see what someone already expects you to see? Even in everyday relationships, attention changes behavior. People act differently when they feel watched, judged, or evaluated. They open up differently when they feel seen without pressure. Observation alters the system, not mystically, but relationally. Seen this way, reality begins to look less like a fixed stage and more like a dynamic dialogue between observer and observed. From a single electron that refuses to behave until measured, to a human being unconsciously adjusting themselves under someone else's gaze, the pattern repeats. Not because the universe revolves around us, but because participation is built into how systems work. Reality is not something we stand outside of looking in. We are always part of the loop. And once you recognize that, the most important question isn't what you're observing, but how you're observing it. Because that how quietly shapes everything that follows. So what does this actually mean in real life? It doesn't mean you control reality by thinking harder, and it doesn't mean the universe bends to belief. It means this: the way you approach situations, what you look for, what you anticipate, what you emotionally prepare for, quietly shapes how rigid or flexible your experience becomes. If you enter every conversation scanning for threat, you will find tension. If you approach every opportunity measuring risk before possibility, life will feel narrow, not because reality is against you, but because repeated observation solidifies experience. Change doesn't begin with forcing a new outcome. It begins by noticing how you're already interacting with what's in front of you. So let's step back and look at what we've actually uncovered. Not a technique, not a belief system, not a promise that life will suddenly transform if you think the right way. What we've uncovered is leverage. At the deepest level of physics, reality doesn't behave like a fixed object. It behaves like a system of possibilities that becomes more defined the moment it's forced to give a clear answer. At the level of human experience, something similar happens. Your life doesn't repeat itself because the universe is testing you. It repeats because certain interpretations have become automatic. And automation, once in place, feels like fate. Most people believe change comes from effort, pushing harder, fixing faster, proving more. But effort without awareness usually just reinforces the same pattern, the same lens, the same collapse. The real shift begins earlier. It begins when you stop asking, how do I get a different result? And start asking, what am I consistently reinforcing? Because whatever you engage with most reliably becomes more stable in your life. Not because it's deserved, but because systems respond to repetition. This is where many people misunderstand observation. They think it means thinking about something, visualizing it, convincing themselves it's true. In practice, that's not observation. Observation is what you emotionally return to, what you repeatedly rehearse, what you treat as already decided. When you constantly observe your life through tension, you stabilize tension. When you observe it through threat, you stabilize threat. When you observe it through curiosity, something different happens. Reality doesn't need to be convinced. It only needs to be engaged differently. This isn't about becoming positive. It's about becoming less rigid. It's about allowing more than one outcome to exist again. That's why the most powerful moments of change are often quiet. They don't feel like breakthroughs. They feel like pauses. Moments where you don't immediately label. Moments where you don't rush to meaning. Moments where you let the situation breathe. Those pauses are not passive. They're acts of restraint, and restraint preserves possibility. So here's the invitation. For the next few days, don't try to change your life. Just watch how you're watching it. Notice what you measure. Notice what you scan for. Notice what you assume before anything actually happens. And when you catch yourself collapsing a familiar interpretation, don't fight it. Just pause. That pause is where choice re-enters. You don't need to eliminate old patterns to move forward. You only need to stop treating them as the final truth. Because once an interpretation stops being final, it stops being permanent. And that's the quiet power of the observer, not as a creator of reality, but as a participant who can loosen the grip of a familiar story. If this perspective resonated with you, take a moment and reflect. Not in the comments, not for anyone else, but for yourself. What are you consistently reinforcing without realizing it? And what might happen if you stopped locking it in place? That question alone can open more space than any technique ever could. If you'd like to explore ideas like this, grounded in science, lived experience, and practical application, you're welcome to subscribe. Not for answers, but for better questions. Because reality doesn't change when you demand it to. It changes when you stop insisting it stay the same. And that's where something new finally has room to appear.